time being, it's impossible for me to take my family back to the UK safely. Well, for a start, the only time that I've come back to the UK is...
There are moments in royal history that do not arrive with fanfare. They do not come with press conferences, prepared statements read aloud on the steps of a palace, or carefully coordinated public appearances designed to manage the narrative. The most consequential moments inside the British monarchy arrive quietly. They travel through closed corridors, through whispered conversations between senior advisors, through the weight of a single signature on a document that nobody outside those walls will ever fully read. And when those moments finally reach the outside world, they do not arrive as explanations. They arrive as verdicts. What has just emerged from inside the royal household is exactly that kind of verdict. Not a pause, not a cooling period, not the carefully worded diplomatic language that leaves a thread of possibility dangling for the public to pull at. What has come out of the palace in these last hours is something far more permanent, far more devastating, and far more revealing about the true state of the royal family than anything that has been said publicly in years. Prince William, the future King of England, has overruled what sources close to the situation are describing as a deeply personal and emotionally charged plea from his younger brother Prince Harry. And the palace has now confirmed, in language that leaves no room for interpretation, that there is no active reconciliation process. There is no path being quietly prepared behind the scenes. There is no private bridge being carefully constructed away from public eyes. The door, by all indications, has been closed. And the man who closed it was not King Charles. It was William. To understand why this moment carries the weight that it does, you have to understand what Harry was actually asking for. This was not a casual request. This was not a brief note passed through intermediaries suggesting that perhaps the family might consider a phone call at some point in the future when schedules allowed. By all accounts, Harry's plea was substantive. It was personal. It was the kind of request that takes a great deal of courage, or perhaps desperation, to make. He was asking for a private family meeting. A real one. A gathering without layers of palace staff standing between every sentence. Without carefully prepared language reviewed by communications teams before a single word was spoken. He wanted to sit in a room with his father and with senior members of the family and speak honestly. He wanted one genuine opportunity to address the years of damage, the public wounds, the accusations and counter-accusations that have played out in front of a watching world for the better part of half a decade. For Harry, this request was not simply about reconciliation in the abstract. It was about something more fundamental. It was about whether he still belonged, in any meaningful sense, to the family he was born into. A family that shaped him, defined him, gave him his identity, placed on him an enormous burden of public duty, and then, through a combination of institutional pressure and deeply personal conflict, watched as he walked away from all of it. The plea was, at its core, a question. Is there still a way back? Is there still a door that opens from this side? William's answer, delivered not with anger, but with something far more unsettling, was no. Those who have been briefed on the nature of the prince's response describe it in terms that speak to his evolution as a royal figure. This was not the William of earlier years, the one who wore his emotions closer to the surface, the one whose grief and frustration occasionally found their way into public view. This was a different man, a man who has spent years watching how emotional decisions made inside the palace can become catastrophic outside it. A man who has watched reconciliation attempts become media events, private conversations become published revelations, and family pain become content consumed by millions of people who have no stake in the outcome, but an insatiable appetite for the story. William has learned, perhaps more profoundly than any other senior royal of his generation, that in the modern media environment, every gesture carries meaning far beyond its intention. A single photograph can undo months of carefully managed distance. A single public appearance together can be spun into a narrative of forgiveness before a single genuine conversation has taken place. He was not willing to let that happen again. Sources familiar with the internal dynamics of the royal household suggest that William's decision was not made impulsively. It was the result of careful consideration, of weighing the costs on multiple fronts simultaneously. There was the cost to King Charles, who has spent the years of his reign already battling health challenges and the relentless pressure of governing an institution that exists in a state of permanent public scrutiny. There was the cost to Princess Catherine, who has already paid an extraordinary personal price simply by virtue of her position, and who, according to those close to the situation, was being drawn into Harry's request in a way that William found deeply troubling. And there was the cost to the institution itself, which William does not see merely as a family business, but as something he will be personally responsible for preserving and protecting for the rest of his life. It is on the subject of Catherine that the most striking details have emerged. Those with knowledge of the internal discussions describe a specific moment of tension, one that goes some way toward explaining why William's position hardened as decisively as it did. Harry's plea, it appears, included a request for Catherine to be present at the proposed family meeting. On the surface, this might seem like a reasonable request. She is, after all, William's wife, the mother of the future king, and a central figure in the royal family. But William understood immediately what her presence at such a gathering would mean in the eyes of the world. It would not be read as a family meeting. It would be read as forgiveness. Her face would become the symbol of reconciliation. Her attendance would tell a story of healing that had not actually happened, of trust restored that had not actually been rebuilt. She would be placed, without her choosing it, at the center of a narrative she had not written and could not control. William refused that, firmly, immediately, and without apology. This is perhaps the detail that explains more than any other why the palace's confirmation has come in the language that it has. When William drew that line, it was not simply a brother protecting a complicated relationship with a sibling. It was a husband protecting his wife. It was a father thinking about his children, about the world they are growing up in, about the consequences that every royal decision carries for the next generation. And it was a future king making the kind of decision that future kings have to make, the ones that carry a personal cost so significant it cannot be fully acknowledged, because the institution requires that the cost be paid regardless. King Charles's role in all of this is perhaps the most heartbreaking dimension of the entire situation. Those familiar with the king's private state describe a man carrying a sorrow that neither crown nor duty can fully absorb. He is a father. He has 2 sons. One of them is asking to come closer, and the other has determined that closer is not possible without risk. Charles did not overrule William. He allowed the refusal to stand. And in doing so, he made a choice that no father should have to make between the immediate emotional needs of his younger son and the long-term stability of the institution that his elder son will one day lead. The king has spent years trying to hold both of those things at once, trying to be a father and a monarch simultaneously. And this moment appears to have forced a choice between the two that he could not avoid any longer. Queen Camilla, by all accounts, attempted at one point to ask whether the language being used in the palace's formal position could be softened slightly, whether there was a way to leave some small sense of dignity intact for Harry without suggesting that any door remained open. William considered this and declined. He understood something that compassion alone could not override. In the world of royal communications, a soft phrase is not a kindness. It is an opening. And openings, in his experience, become pressure campaigns. They become headlines that count down to a reunion. They become questions at every public event, every palace appearance, every carefully managed moment of royal life. He could not give the world a thread to pull. So he did not. The formal confirmation from the palace has been described by those who have seen its substance as precise, measured, and entirely unambiguous. There is no active reconciliation process. Those 5 words carry an enormous amount of weight. They do not say reconciliation is impossible forever. They do not say the family has given up on Harry as a person. But they say, with absolute clarity, that the palace is not working toward reunion right now, is not in private discussions about how to bring the family back together, and is not preparing the ground for any kind of return. For Harry, who has spent recent months speaking publicly about his hope that the family rift might one day be healed, who has expressed in interviews his desire to have a relationship with his father, who has made clear that despite everything, the family he left behind still matters to him profoundly. This confirmation is devastating in its specificity. Meghan, by those accounts that have filtered through, received the news alongside Harry and understood its implications on multiple levels simultaneously. She is a woman who thinks strategically and feels deeply, and the combination of those two qualities means she grasped not only the emotional meaning of the refusal, but its practical consequences as well. Without even the possibility of reconciliation, a certain kind of narrative, one in which the Sussexes are eventually welcomed back into the royal fold on terms that dignify their choices and acknowledge their experiences, becomes impossible to sustain. The public positioning of their work, their advocacy, their identity as former senior royals who chose a different path, all of it exists partly in relation to the family they left. And when a family makes clear officially that it is not moving toward them, that relationship shifts. They are no longer figures in a story that might have a different ending. They are figures in a story that has been given its ending by the institution itself. Public reaction in Britain has been swift and divided, which is perhaps the most honest reflection of how genuinely complicated this situation is. Those who support William and have watched him grow into his role as the future king see in his decision the kind of strength that the monarchy requires. They see a man who learned from everything that went wrong, who refused to repeat the cycles of pressure and apology and public theater that have marked the last several years, who made a hard choice because hard choices are what the crown demands. And they are not wrong. There is a kind of strength in what William has done. A cold strength, perhaps. A painful one. But strength nonetheless. Those who feel sympathy for Harry see something different. They see a man who made mistakes, who handled his departure from royal life in ways that caused real damage, but who is ultimately a son asking his family to hear him. They see a plea for connection being answered with institutional language. They see a brother being told, in the clearest possible terms, that the door is not merely closed but locked. And they find in that image something that speaks to experiences many people carry, of families fractured by conflict and pride, of doors that are shut before anyone is ready for them to be shut, of the terrible permanence that official decisions can impose on relationships that are, underneath everything, entirely human.